The next book I have is by Louis Gerstner Jr.
I know him well.
Yeah?
Yeah, the first video that you did.
There we go.
About him for about an hour and a half.
There we go.
Head of IBM.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So,
He was listening.
Leon, my friend.
Who says elephants can't dance?
Good title. Pique your interest.
I'm like, what's that
what's
about?
What's that all about? Louis Gerstner Jr. This very man is the reason for the podcast being called Culture is the Game.
Oh, right. Okay. It's not Chelsea FC.
No, it's not Chelsea. Blue is the colour. Culture is the game.
We should go to Stamford Bridge and get them to sing that. And
that would
could
be good.
Part of it.
That's the infinite cause of this podcast, although it's finite, so it's not. Maybe we have to do like a you'll never sell alone podcast.
We should do it.
There you go. This book is very much, I think, the best quote of all time in my life, anyway. And the reason that this podcast is called Culture is the Game, and the reason why I've said that sentence so many times that even when I say culture is the game, it rings funny in my head because I've said it so many times. I have like flashbacks to all the different times I've said it. Louis Gerstner Jr. was the CEO of IBM in the 1990s. Just check those dates for me, please. It might have been from the 80s. He was there for about 10-ish years, something like that.
I reckon it's probably April 1993 to March 2002, something like that.
Okay, so he was the CEO in the 90s, 93 till 2002, and listen, IBM, obviously, absolutely enormous company, had over 400,000 employees at their peak. 400,000 employees.
Crazy.
It's the size of a country. It's absolutely insane. And not your generation, but the generation before and before, they know IBM as being the reason behind the financial viability of many towns in the country. Like, people worked for IBM. It was an IBM town. So a very important company, and still are. And a big part of the reason that they still are is when Louis Gerstner Jr. came in, they were bang in trouble, IBM. 400,000 employees, bang in trouble. And he was very much a transformational CEO. Now, a quick point on that. We've discussed this many times before. For successful organizations, the stats show that hiring in a external CEO to replace the existing one is not a good strategy. Very often doesn't work. When it does work is when the business needs a transformation, which is what IBM did need at that phase, and worked very well. And obviously they hired well. There's a quote here that I want to read to you, and I'm going to read it in full. Let me get it up here.
I thought you were typing the quote. It was going to be one of your own.
That would be good. Here we go. I'm just going to read the whole thing. I've spent more than 25 years as a senior executive of 3 different corporations, and I peeked into many more as a consultant in the years before that. Until I came to IBM, I probably would have told you that culture was just one among several important elements in any organization's makeup and success, along with vision, strategy, marketing, financials, and the like. I came to see in my time at IBM that culture isn't just one aspect of the game, it is the game. In the end, an organization is nothing more than the collective capacity of its people to create value. The reason I love that quote so much is going back to this thing that I genuinely thought when I first started working in companies, that I discovered this thing that basically culture is the game. I didn't say it as pithily as that. I don't know, I think initially it disappointed me to realize that I'm in fact not a genius. But then the more you study history of organizations and books like these, this is this is what, 20 odd years ago now, you realize, it's true because it's always been the case. And you have some of the greatest transformational CEOs in history say exactly the same thing. Louis Gerstner Jr. had a prolific career. He was at Amex and he had a wonderful career. He worked as a consultant, as he said, and he managed to look into lots of different organizations from an external and an internal perspective, and got through most of his career in executive positions thinking how most people who have a sort of pretty good foundation of what culture actually mean, thinking of it in a very similar way as most people do, that it's, it is an important subject, at least you hope, at least people think it's an important subject, but not understanding that it is the game, it's everything that happens. And I've just never found a better way to say it. I think that is the summary of how, over the last, how long is it now? 15 years longer that I've felt. And it's the greatest articulation of exactly the truth of the world in organizations.
And is that because I think you said vision, strategy, marketing, financials, culture? Mm-hmm. They were what you thought were the different pillars, but actually it's culture. Is that because culture permeates all of those different things?
Sits above all of those things.
But also through them as well, though, yeah?
Through them, around them, above them, in them, everything. It should be them. So take one of them, finance. I understand for a layperson, and when I say a layperson, I mean a non-boring person like me who is obsessed with the subject, is culture and finance seem like very different things. They're not. The way your finances should work in an organization should be the output of your culture. Give you an example. Amazon, have you ever heard of them?
I've seen them mentioned before.
Anyway, they're a very successful company, and they sell books, other things. They are a very infinite-minded organization. They are probably the infinite-minded organization. Jeff Bezos every year talks about it's still day one. They're always at the start. They're always building things. Anyway, they have always done something that's relatively unusual, although it's changed as a result of them. There have been some fast followers to this way of looking. Because they're infinite-minded and they care about long-term success, instead of measuring shareholder price, they have always measured free cash flow per share. That's the metric they're most interested in. The reason why that's the measure they're most interested in is because that measure is the most conducive financial metric towards long-term success.
So the culture element of that is thinking of things differently. Is that what you're saying?
The thing first there is whatever word you want to use, infinite-minded, they care about the long term. That's the philosophy. That's why they're there, and you can just use that. There's many companies who don't care about the long term, want to make as much money as they possibly can very quickly, and you could have an organization like Amazon, delivery service, products, whatever, that are in the same industry and care about let's get to 100 mil. A billion as quickly as we possibly can, and they would measure things very differently. They would be more concerned with how shareholders in the here and now each quarter value the organization, because then that then dictates how much they can sell the business for. And but Amazon don't feel that way. They have a long-term aspirations. They don't care about that measure. They don't care about it. They don't care about it anywhere near as much as free cash flow per share, because that tells us how quickly we can grow and how long we can keep building and building over the long term, rather than getting themselves into cash flow issues, which is, again, another example of short-sightedness. So the thing there is the philosophy, long term, that's what we care about. Then let's call it a custom. This is how we measure our finances. This is our leading metric that we're interested in. Then the way that the company works, i.e. the behavior, is you can take, sales teams or product design teams. they are not measured on what the output of being measured on shareholder, each individual share price would be. Therefore, they probably make different decisions.
Yeah. Drives a different behavior in them.
So that's a good one, because finances would probably be the subject that people would feel most like, well, that's not culture. Like, it is, because the way it all works is downstream from a philosophy, and the philosophy is the very thing at the core of a culture. Therefore, instead of thinking about building a business, think about building a culture. It's a useful way of looking at it. Now, I don't want to be idealistic, because I am absolutely a pragmatist. It's different at a startup phase. It is different.
We've said that before.
I just always want to reiterate that, because I don't want to, sound like someone who has never been in a company and giving all these aspirational ideological ways of thinking. It's different when you're a startup. Like, you just you've gotta prove viability. You've got to know where you fit in the market. You've got to know where your money's going to come from. You've got to get money coming in, stability, viability, all of those things. You have to do that. But if you're going to be an organization that's going to be anything on the realm of sizable, like, high, I don't know, I can't put a specific number on it. You're hiring a dozen or dozens of people upwards, up to 400,000 people, then think of yourself as a culture. You should transition from there. If you want to stay a small company and have 2, 3, 4, 5 people, maybe it's not a subject you have to concern yourself with as much. I would still don't recommend that. But when you scale and you have the complexity of numbers, think of your organization as a culture. You have to do a lot of work to understand what that actually means, because you might go down the road of, making sure people have the pizzas on a Friday afternoon. So you have to understand what it means. And that's a good example of it. Finances, downstream from culture, because the thing that sits at the top of a culture is a philosophy, and your philosophy should then impact the way you do everything within the subject of finance.
I didn't think you'd get to culture from finance when you said that they were so interesting.
I can get to culture from anywhere.
One question before we wrap up this one, though. So you said that Louis V. Gerstner Jr. was one of the greatest transformational CEOs. So who are two more of the greatest transformational CEOs in the Harvey Gilbert top 3 transformational CEOs?
I would say, let me say this. I would say that Louis Gerstner Jr. was CEO for one of the great transformations.
Okay.
I didn't sit next to him. I'm sure he came up with the greatest quote of all time. I don't know. I don't know the fella. And the reason I say that is because people often ask me the question about companies, like, what companies do you admire? And you always have to answer, it's like, well, there are things within companies that I really admire about the way they do stuff, but it's not about IBM necessarily. He was, as well as, let's take someone like, another book will do another point, Gordon Bethune, I think is the way you pronounce his surname. So he was the CEO of Continental Airlines, wrote a book called From Worst to First. So they were the worst rated airline in the US. Another great transformation of then coming in and putting some, really, again, the same thing, coming in and implementing some customs, some systems, some processes that connected to a very simple philosophy that changed the behavior of the organization. And they went from, on many different measures, such as, I don't know what they call it in airlines, but punctuality, lack of lost baggage, said that well, and a few other measures became the first. Here's another one. See what Satya Nadella at Microsoft gets up to. They were really struggling under Steve Ballmer, who I'd very much say was a finite-minded leader. Sure, he had his good traits as well, but I would say overarching a finite-minded leader. He seems to be doing well. Many of them. I know we are currently filming a podcast, And it's useful to use the IBMs, the Amazons, the Apples of the world as analogies. But most companies you don't see, they're the SMEs, and they are more, they're a better example of what the average organization is like. They haven't got 400,000 employees. I've seen many of my clients that I've worked closely with that, who knows, maybe they're turning over 10 million, they're turning over 50 million, and they go through a dip and they're going through challenges and the culture's gone wrong. And you see over a 6, 9, 12-month period, things start to change, and you see them get back in, even if you take the financial measure, back into growing and into successful financial territory. So they're the things that I'm interested in, but it's always good to look at some of the IBMs and the Louis Gerstner Juniors of the world and realize that culture is the game.